A retired teacher's peaceful garage sale was shut down by a self-appointed compliance officer, waving fake authority and red tape. Ron Bickley posed like a hero until his arrogance exposed a bigger scheme. But Maggie's daughter Sarah knew the law better than he did, and she brought real power to the table. Just wait until you see how this neighborhood turned the tables, and justice struck back where it hurt most. It had started like any other hopeful Saturday in Lakeview Estates, the kind of day Maggie Doyle, 67, had once imagined would be peaceful, perhaps even joyful. Her driveway was lined with fold-out tables, each neatly organized with hand-labeled price tags and signs drawn in pastel Sharpie. Toys once loved by her grandchildren, stacks of well-worn novels, mismatched teacups, and even a bread maker she hadn't touched in 10 years, all set out to help clear space for the next chapter of her life. Maggie wasn't just cleaning house, she was preparing to move closer to her daughter, Sarah, and finally spend more time with her grandkids. That garage sale, modest as it was, symbolized something important: closure, transition, and maybe even a little pride in letting go. Neighbors strolled by with coffee in hand, chatting as they browsed the tables. Mrs. Padilla from across the street offered to bring folding chairs. A teenage boy helped Maggie carry a bin of cookbooks from the garage. Someone even strung a little Bluetooth speaker, playing 60s classics. By 9:15 a.m., the whole thing felt like a small community fair. Then, without warning, the mood shattered. A dark SUV turned the corner too fast, tires screeching against the curb as it came to a stop half on the road, half on Maggie's grass. 3 people climbed out, all wearing dark polo shirts and lanyards with cheap plastic badges. "Lakeview Compliance Patrol," they read, printed in bold font over a golden HOA seal. At the front of the group was a tall man with stiff posture and a permanent scowl etched into his face: Ron Bickley. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't even ask a question. Instead, he raised a phone and began snapping pictures of Maggie's tables like it was a crime scene. "This sale violates HOA Code 7, 3.2, he announced in a clipped voice. "Unauthorized commercial activity on residential property." Maggie blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me. This is just a garage sale. This is just a Saturday sale like we've done for years." But her words didn't matter. The woman beside Ron was already peeling red vinyl stickers and slapping them onto the edge of Maggie's folding tables. Bold lettering reading "Cease and Desist, Non-Compliant Activity." The third enforcer, a younger man who looked barely out of college, began handing flyers to the startled customers, warning them they were participating in unregistered commercial activity under HOA investigation. Shoppers froze mid-step. Some exchanged awkward glances and backed away. A few neighbors quietly gathered their kids and left. A little girl named Ava, who had just picked out a stuffed bear for $1, burst into tears when one of the enforcers snatched the toy from her hands and placed it back on the table with a sticker. Maggie could hardly speak. Her cheeks burned. Her hands trembled. I have approval," she stammered. "I posted in the community group and no one said—" "Posting in a group chat isn't a permit," Ron snapped, "and ignorance of HOA code isn't a defense." Within minutes, the driveway was empty. The music had stopped. The laughter vanished. And Maggie was left standing in front of her tables, now marked up like contraband at a customs checkpoint. The smell of morning coffee still lingered, but the warmth was gone. Her garage sale, the one she had planned for weeks, the one her neighbors had rallied around, was over before it ever had a chance. 15 minutes. That's all it took for 3 strangers in matching polos to humiliate a grandmother on her own property and turn a simple neighborhood moment into a public spectacle. And as she slowly peeled one of the red stickers off a box of paperbacks, Maggie wasn't just upset. She felt something deeper taking root, something colder, sharper, and more dangerous than confusion. She felt wronged, and she wasn't the only one. By Sunday morning, word of the garage sale incident had spread through Lakeview Estates like wildfire. At first it was whispers, neighbors texting screenshots of the red stickers, murmurs in front yards, and quiet check-ins asking, "Did you hear what they did to Maggie Doyle?" But by noon, those whispers became a chorus of disbelief, and by Monday, they turned into something else entirely: anger. Everyone in Lakeview knew Maggie. She wasn't just someone who waved from the porch. She was the retired schoolteacher who left notes in holiday mailboxes, baked banana bread for new families, and remembered every dog's name. To see her publicly embarrassed like that, shamed on her own driveway by a man no one had voted for, felt personal, especially when folks started comparing notes. The week before, a different neighbor, Rachel Quinn, had hosted a sip and shop event in her backyard. Wine, handmade candles, credit card reader, the works. No enforcement, no patrols, no stickers. And why not? Because Rachel sat on the HOA board. That's when people realized something deeper was happening. This wasn't about garage sales or community codes. It was about power and how quickly it corrupted. At the center of it all was Ron Bickley, a man who took his new title, Chief Enforcement Officer, with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for federal agents. Ron had once been a middling building inspector before he retired early, and when the HOA president, Trina Voss, appointed him as the head of compliance, it gave him something he'd longed for: authority without oversight. Trina herself was no stranger to control. She used to work in corporate HR and brought that same cold efficiency to Lakeview Estates. In her world, the neighborhood was a spreadsheet. Residents were line items to be corrected, filed, or deleted. It was no surprise she'd empowered someone like Ron to clean things up. But their version of order was starting to look less like community service and more like something else entirely. Meanwhile, Maggie hadn't spoken much since the incident. She stayed inside most of Sunday, only stepping out to pull her unsold items back into the garage. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, folding blankets, resealing boxes. It wasn't the work that weighed her down. It was the embarrassment. When her daughter Sarah pulled into the driveway that afternoon, she found Maggie sitting just inside the garage, staring at an old baby stroller that still had a handwritten tag. $5, gently used, needs a new home. Sarah dropped her keys and rushed to kneel beside her. "Mom, what happened?" "They made me feel like a criminal," Maggie whispered. "Over junk. They came out of nowhere. Just took it all." Sarah wrapped her arms around her mother, but her eyes were already scanning the flyers still littering the ground. Her heart ached, but behind it, something else was brewing. Back online, Ron was doubling down. In the Lakeview Estates Facebook group, he posted a grinning selfie, standing stiffly in front of Maggie's driveway like he'd just wrapped up a major bust. The caption read, "Another case of unauthorized peddling shut down. Our neighborhood is no place for rogue commerce. Hash compliance matters, hash code enforced." It was tone-deaf, smug, and worst of all, deliberate. A few bored loyalists, residents who believed in strict order, commented things like, "Great job, Ron," and "keeping Lakeview classy." But most of the replies, they weren't praise. They were questions. What code was violated exactly? Why now? Garage sales have happened for years. How is this different from Trina's daughter's bake sale? Is this even legal? By nightfall, Maggie's garage sale wasn't just a neighborhood incident. It was a spark, one that lit a fire under a community that had for too long kept its head down. Ron Bickley thought he'd made an example out of Maggie, but all he'd really done was pick the wrong woman in the wrong driveway on the wrong Saturday. And her daughter had just arrived. Sarah Doyle had always been the calm one, the one who listened more than she spoke, the one who sorted through tax filings with the kind of patience only a county worker could develop. But as she drove back home from Lakeview Estates that Sunday night, her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She kept replaying her mother's voice. "They humiliated me over junk." That wasn't just pain. That was injustice. And injustice had a paper trail. Sarah knew where to look. By sunrise Monday morning, Sarah wasn't drinking coffee. She was scrolling through county zoning codes, cross-checking Lakeview's residential ordinances with the HOA's own published bylaws. As a senior analyst at the county's Office of Tax Compliance and Commercial Licensing, she specialized in cases exactly like this: unauthorized businesses, misuse of authority, improper licensing. And the more she dug, the more the pieces began to click into place. Ron Bickley had called Maggie's garage sale unlicensed commerce. He had issued warnings, handed out flyers, and forced a public shutdown. But what Ron and his little patrol squad hadn't realized was that labeling something as commercial activity and taking enforcement action didn't just require an HOA vote, it required actual legal authority. Zoning authority, county-level compliance registration, bonded enforcement agents, real permits. Ron had none of that. He wasn't a code officer. He wasn't even a contractor. He was a man with a badge from a printer and a title made up in a board meeting. By 9 a.m., Sarah was in a pressed blazer, walking through the doors of the HOA's main office with a colleague from the county's legal division. In her arms was a neatly tabbed binder, color-coded and ready. The receptionist looked up, startled. "I'm here to request documentation under public records review," Sarah said calmly. "Specifically enforcement licensing, authorization to issue regulatory fines, and transactional records of processing fees collected by any compliance personnel." The receptionist blinked. "Processing fees?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, we have reports that HOA enforcement has been collecting payments in exchange for citations. If that's true, we'll need to verify the regulatory framework that gives them that authority. And," she added without blinking, "we'll need to see how those funds are being deposited." Within minutes, Trina Voss appeared, cool, polished, and clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she offered with a corporate smile. "Our enforcement officer is acting within the guidelines of the HOA charter." Sarah opened her binder and slid a single sheet across the desk. It was a printout from the state's business license registry. "According to public record," she said, tapping the paper, "Mr. Bickley registered a private LLC 3 months ago under the name Civic Code Solutions, and he has been depositing payments labeled as compliance processing into that business account. He's issued over a dozen notices, each with a voluntary fine request attached. That's not neighborhood policy. That's unlicensed regulatory enforcement, possibly even impersonation of public authority." Trina's smile faltered, and that was just the beginning. Sarah's colleague handed over a second document, a formal notice of county review. It outlined the county's right to audit any private entity operating in a regulatory or commercial enforcement capacity within its jurisdiction. The notice came with a temporary freeze request on any new fines issued by the HOA until legal clarification could be obtained. Ron wasn't in the office, but by 11:30 a.m., he'd received his own copy, served at his front door, according to protocol. By noon, a countywide alert had been triggered for potential misuse of authority, unauthorized collection of fines, and operating an unlicensed enforcement business under a nonprofit HOA structure. Sarah didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to, because nothing speaks louder than legal authority, properly filed. And now, it was her turn to enforce. By the end of the week, the silence from the Lakeview HOA board spoke volumes. No more social media posts, no more compliance flyers, no more patrols cruising the neighborhood like they were guarding a military base. Just a single statement posted to the community bulletin board and emailed to every resident. The Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association acknowledges recent concerns regarding unauthorized enforcement activity. We extend our sincere apology to Miss Margaret Doyle and all affected residents. Effective immediately, Ronald Bickley has been relieved of his role. Trina Voss has voluntarily stepped down from her position as HOA president. The board will fully cooperate with the county's ongoing audit. It wasn't just a walkback, it was a surrender. The county's investigation had triggered a freeze on the HOA's discretionary fund, pending a full financial review. All of Ron's fines and processing fees were declared void. Residents who had paid under threat of noncompliance received notices that they were eligible for reimbursement. The HOA's legal counsel, which had remained silent for most of the ordeal, issued a recommendation that all future enforcement activity be vetted for municipal code alignment and subjected to external legal review. But for Sarah, that wasn't enough. She knew this wasn't just about her mother. It was about every resident who'd been fined, warned, or publicly embarrassed for things as trivial as paint colors, sidewalk chalk, or hanging a flower basket without HOA approval. So, with the help of 6 other neighbors and one retired attorney named Harold Booth, Sarah drafted and filed a civil complaint against the HOA for abuse of authority and misapplication of dues. The suit demanded transparency, restitution, and amendments to the bylaws that would prevent any future misuse of enforcement power. The board, under pressure, agreed to mediation. By the following month, the HOA had adopted new language in its charter. All citations now required third-party legal review, and no fines could be issued without written municipal authority. Ron's Enforcement LLC was shut down. The Facebook group was turned over to a rotating committee of residents, and Trina's name quietly removed from all correspondence. But the real moment of victory wasn't in the paperwork. It was on Maggie's driveway the next Saturday morning. The garage sale was back. Only this time, it wasn't just a sale, it was a celebration. Neighbors brought lawn chairs, homemade pastries, and folding tables of their own. A group of local kids set up a lemonade stand at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Someone brought balloons. A Vietnam vet from 2 doors down played acoustic guitar under a shade tree, while Ava, the little girl who once cried over a lost teddy bear, came back with her parents to find the same bear waiting for her, now wrapped in a bow and labeled "Reserved." Maggie stood in the center of it all, a gentle breeze catching the edge of her sun hat, her eyes scanning the crowd with gratitude and quiet pride. Sarah was beside her, sipping coffee and shaking hands with neighbors, who now saw her not just as Maggie's daughter, but as the woman who stood up when no one else could. Near the sidewalk, a laminated sign on an easel read, "All permits accounted for, ask Ron." There was no trace of fear, no red stickers, no angry voices, just community, sunlight, and the sound of people enjoying the freedom of their own front lawns. Maggie sold every last item. But what she truly gained was something far more valuable: her dignity restored, and a neighborhood awakened. Justice wasn't loud that day. It was kind. It was clear. And it finally belonged to the right people.